Ethan! Ethan! Ethan!
Being my first Resident Evil game, and my first true survival horror game, I was skeptical about jumping into Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, but fortunately, I was given a solid game with only some problems to stop the great game from being amazing. You play as Ethan, a man that can come straight out of a cliché horror movie with the generic motive of finding his missing wife, Mia, as he is led by a video into the Baker farm where he assumes she'll be. But what Ethan doesn't realize is he'll have to survive in this giant house by gathering resources and fighting monsters and hillbillies. The gameplay of using your limited ammo, or not, and managing your small inventory is quite simple, but is really satisfying and rewarding. The crafting system is thankfully also simple, with all the HUDs and menus being extremely streamlined and accessible. Another good thing about this game is it gives you just the right amount of enemies. And while there are only about 3 or 4 types of common mobs, you have the ability to kill them, and if you can't, then it's because you don't have enough ammo or you want to save it. You'll never feel like you're versing some kind of god monster, where you have to constantly hide or you're being overwhelmed, as the overall gameplay is definitely more about survival than it is shooting. But the most fun thing to do in the game is exploring the Baker farm. With the spectacular game design developers have created, every room feels different, and that there's a real purpose in being it there. Each room is packed to the brink of detail, and while Resident Evil 7 may not be the most graphically advanced game out there, some interiors just look absolutely incredible thanks to the lighting and attention to detail, with all this adding to the creepy and on-the-edge-of-your-seat atmosphere that it has created. Another thing that adds to the creepy atmosphere is just how brutal the game is. You'll see this in the environments and in the Baker family themselves, who act as the enemy bosses, that something has gone terribly wrong. Unfortunately, the common mobs don't feel as threatening design-wise because of how slow they move, although this is probably fixed in higher difficulties. The atmosphere in the game design seems to be lacking in one of the later levels of the game, with it instead turning into a labyrinth of corridor after corridor of exploration, instead of a small and detailed exploration that I had come to love in the Baker farm. Wherever you're going, you'll never feel lost thanks to the handy map that notes all locked areas and rooms you haven't visited. So, you'll never have to remember it mentally. And I really like this map because of our other survival horror games. You just had to aimlessly find a way to go, but with this, I feel like I was being pushed in the right direction without being forced into a linear path, thanks to its mostly stellar game design. The story was really good, which was surprising, as it doesn't start too well, with it being quite generic, but as soon as you're led into the farm and introduced to the Baker family, everything starts to open up with actual character development for Ethan and his wife. And even the enemies themselves start feeling natural, not just adding to the story, but to the game world itself. The story stayed intriguing throughout the whole game, offering plot twists that I never saw coming, and pushing this simple gameplay forwards with the help of game design, especially when this element became lacking in the end. Also, the game does offer you a choice that gives you a good or bad ending, and while it is quite minor in terms of actual gameplay, as you'll do the same thing in both choices, it still does give replay value for anyone that is big on the story and wants to see the differences firsthand. While the brutalness does add to the atmosphere quite well, it will never add up to how amazingly well done the sound is in this game. The soundtrack itself is suspenseful and adds to the few jump scares and many creepy moments. The actual sound effects, though, reign king in giving us a constant creepy ambiance and making us feel like the world still lives. And that adds so much more fright than any jump scare or bloodbath. Of course, I can't avoid mentioning the voice acting, which is done so well into making the performances of the characters feel more real, especially the Baker family, who have absolutely terrifying performances. In conclusion, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard was a game I had an absolute blast with thanks to its spectacular level design, game design for the most part, intriguing story, satisfying gameplay, incredible sound. Although the common enemies can fall flat in giving you a terrifying experience, and that spectacular level design seen at the start is almost non-existent in the end. Also, you can't deny that since we've completed this game in 9 hours, it is not enough for a full-price game, even if free DLC is being released later. But Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is still a great game, and is showing us a great start for AAA games of 2017. That's why I give this game 4 out of 5.